So tell us, who is Mike Brady and how did you spend your career?
I've been a lawyer for 50 years here at a local Redwood City law firm called Ropers Majeski. I'm also a mediator and an arbitrator. I graduated in 1964 from Stanford University with a degree in American history. And then I went to Harvard Law School where I graduated 3 years later in 67. Came back to California because I loved my years at Stanford and settled in the Bay Area and have lived here in the Bay Area for 50 years.
Tell us the background of the high-speed rail project.
The project started in 2008. It was a bond measure placed on the ballot for $8 billion. And the idea was that 1/3 of the cost of the project would be financed from the bond, 1/3 from federal government contributions, and 1/3 from private investments or private donations, private investments actually. The idea at that time, back in 2008, was that the total cost of the project would be about $33 billion. So that's where you get the 888, which is approximately what they were looking for. They were actually looking for a little bit more from the federal government, but that's what the idea was at that time. Now, since the bond measure went on the ballot, it did pass by about 51% of the votes, and after it passed, the costs estimated for the project started going up. Now, have in mind that this is an 800-mile project. It basically goes from San Francisco to LA, to Anaheim, San Diego, the Imperial Valley, San Bernardino County, and then shoots upwards to Oakland and Sacramento. So the first phase of the project is called San Francisco to LA. The second phase of the project, which is equally important, is basically San Diego all the way up to Sacramento. Now, after they started planning and so forth for the project, like many public works projects, the cost estimates started going up. It went from 33 to 45 billion, and then it went up to 117 billion before people knew what was going on. At that point, the governor panicked and directed the High-Speed Rail Authority, which runs the project, to reduce the costs. And about 7 years ago, the High-Speed Rail Authority said that the cost would be $64 billion just to go from San Francisco to LA. They ignored the rest of the project, which is about 45%. That is the part San Diego to the Imperial Valley to San Bernardino and then up to Oakland and Sacramento. Now that $64 billion cost estimate has never been changed. We have received no new information in more than 6 years as to what the total cost of the project is. Some experts in California say this could be a $200 to $250 billion project. So you've got a huge issue about the underestimation of what this project costs. There have been some concrete cost overruns. For example, in the 2012-2013 time period, the contractor, the main contractor for the High-Speed Rail Authority, said that the cost to go over the Tehachapi Mountains on the way from Bakersfield to Los Angeles would be 1/3 higher, or $9.5 billion higher than what the authority had been telling the voters and telling the people. That information was covered up by the authority for 25 months, more than 2 years. Finally, a whistleblower went to the LA Times and they disclosed this huge misrepresentation by the authority. They had to disclose this. They got into trouble. And shortly thereafter, they abandoned, at least for the time being, and it's never been reactivated. They abandoned getting to LA. They switched their plans. Instead of going to LA with 10 million people living in that county, they decided to go from Bakersfield to San Jose. So that was a major change. So in the process of trying to get from Bakersfield to San Jose, they have recently disclosed that that segment is 77% over the estimated cost. It's now over $10 billion. It started out about close to $6 billion. So huge cost overruns already disclosed and continuing. One final point on the costs. A law in California says that every time the authority goes to the legislature and gives a report to the legislature, which they're required to do every 2 years, they have to give a cost estimate for the entire project, that's all 800 miles, plus every individual segment of it. They have to give a cost estimate. They have never done this. This is a violation of law, and what issue would the voters and the residents of California be more interested in than the cost of what some say is the largest public works project in the United States? Of course the voters would be interested in whether it's gone up.
What about the Peninsula Electrification Program and the partnership with Caltrain?
The Peninsula Electrification Project is run by Caltrain. Caltrain is a partner with high-speed rail. And high-speed rail will come to the peninsula. That's what they say. High-speed rail has given the peninsula nearly $1 billion to help finance the Caltrain electrification program, which is meant to electrify the entire 55-mile corridor from San Francisco to San Jose. So the fact that they have given Caltrain, high-speed rail, has given Caltrain $750 million means that Caltrain is indeed a partner with high-speed rail. But there's a huge scandal also on the peninsula about cost overruns. About 4 years ago, the cost of the Peninsula Electrification Program was estimated to be $800 million. As we sit here today, the cost is already slightly over $3 billion. So it's gone up more than 300%. This is a real scandal, a real scandal. Plus, there are other serious problems. They have to develop, Caltrain has to develop what we call positive train control. This is an electrical system that prevents trains from colliding with each other. We don't want that. And there are 4 railroad lines that are going to be using the same set of tracks on the peninsula. 4. So they have to develop a system like this. Well, what they did was, for years, they have spent millions of dollars trying to develop a system. They've totally failed. They fired the contractor recently who was in charge of developing this system. And they just are, they're not making any progress at all. Nothing can be done until they develop this train control, this anti-collision system. This is required by federal law and state law, and they're making no progress. And they fired the contractor who was working on it for several years. Secondly, they've got a major, what we call, signaling problem. Obviously, when a train is headed up to San Francisco to San Jose, it's going to cross 52 intersections. Most of them are at grade with no grade separation because they don't have the money to create expensive grade separation. So in crossing these intersections, there has to be an electrical system to make the crossing guards at each intersection come down to stop the cars from getting run into by a train, and then to raise the crossing guards when the train goes past. So they've been working on this system for nearly 2 years without success. And they recently fired the contractor who was in charge. And who did they hire? They hired a contractor who has been working on a similar system in Denver, Colorado, with 17 intersections, an electrical train system. They hired this contractor who recently said, I can't do it. It's impossible. I cannot solve the problem. We cannot devise an electrical system that will make the crossing guards come down as the train from San Jose heading north approaches each individual intersection. Well, you can't even have any system whatsoever if it's unsafe. And this is grossly unsafe. And what does Caltrain do? They hire exactly this same contractor called Balfour Beatty that was unable to do the job in Denver. It's a classic case of incompetence on the part of the Caltrain and the High Speed Rail Association, the two partners for the Peninsula electrical system. Just a scandal.
What's the future of high-speed rail then when Jerry Brown leaves office? And where do the high-speed rail supporters hope to get the future funding?
Well, Jerry Brown is the biggest backer of high-speed rail. He thinks that it is his legacy program. He doesn't like to spend any money on the freeways. And we all know how terrible our roads and freeways are in California, but he loves the train. And he tries to give as much money to the train as he can. When Jerry Brown leaves office in about 6 months, the enthusiasm for the train will definitely go down, because there are a lot of legislators who are currently afraid of Jerry Brown because he has a lot of political power and a lot of excess campaign funds to hang out. So they don't want to buck the governor. But once he leaves and a new governor takes over, the chances are pretty high that the enthusiasm for spending billions of dollars on a failed train system, the enthusiasm will go down. Because there are many Democrats in the legislature that would much prefer to spend those billions of dollars. And California doesn't have unlimited funds. We're in pretty bad shape financially. They would rather spend those billions of dollars that are devoted to high-speed rail on other projects that the Democratic majority favor, like education, law enforcement, water projects. And we certainly do have to invest in those funds or those enterprises in California.
Are there alternatives to electrification, such as hybrid diesel?
Yes, this is very important, and it's an issue that has been suppressed by Caltrain, which wants electrification and electrification only. Since Proposition 1A was adopted back 10 years ago, there have been big improvements on diesel transportation in trains. Something called Tier 4 diesel, which runs very efficiently, very effectively, fast, and it's much cheaper. For example, the Caltrain system would cost about $500 million instead of more than $3 billion, which is the current estimate for electrical. You could get a good diesel system called Tier 4 diesel. You wouldn't reach San Francisco, you would reach San Francisco about 4 minutes later from San Jose than you would in an electric train. But isn't that worth it to save hundreds of millions of dollars and ride quiet, efficient, fast diesel? You just get to San Francisco 4 minutes later. Isn't that worth it? One would think so. And you know what else? Something that is very important to people who live on the peninsula. The peninsula is a beautiful area. The train runs through some of the most beautiful parts of the peninsula. Cities like Burlingame, San Mateo, Belmont, Atherton, Menlo Park, Palo Alto, Mountain View. These are beautiful areas. An electrical system is going to do some severe damage to the beauty of the Central Peninsula and the South Peninsula because they have to put up 45-foot steel towers called catenary towers, 45 feet high. They have to rip out and tear down a lot of the vegetation and the trees, which is very beautiful and which adds a lot of charm and beauty to the existing peninsula. A diesel system would not involve any of this destruction of the peninsula. The electrical system would. I like to have this example. An electrical system in many parts of the peninsula would look like the railroad approach between Newark, New Jersey and Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Ugly, industrial, drab. Whereas the present approach with our beautiful trees and shrubbery, which hide the railroad and lends beauty to our cities, would be preserved if we go with a diesel system and not use this horribly expensive electrical system.
What would it take to redirect those funds?
That's a good question, and it is. The legislature could very easily remedy this. The legislature, once Jerry Brown leaves, could pass an initiative that would then go to the voters for approval, because Proposition 1A, which created the $8 billion bond fund, that proposition can't be changed unless the voters agree to change it by a different initiative. So the legislature has the power to put an initiative on the ballot. The initiative could be a 2-sentence simple initiative, and it would say this: the funds remaining in the Proposition 1A bond fund are hereby redirected for the benefit of California water projects, education, and law enforcement. And you could choose other projects, whatever the legislature chooses. But that means that several $1 billion that are left in the Proposition 1A bond fund would go for those uses instead of to the train. And if the voters approved it, that could be done. So I see that as a real possibility. As far as without that, future funding is in great distress. There's serious questions that they would ever be able to raise the $100 billion to complete this system. Nor are there many people in California that want that kind of money to be spent on a high-speed rail system. The federal government has stopped giving them money. The federal government years ago became disgusted with the incompetence and the delay in the project. Incidentally, this project is required under the law to be finished in 2 years, in 2020. Do you really think right now, with not 1 inch of track having been laid, they're going to be able to complete an 800-mile system in 2 years? Well, I told you, the federal government has quit giving them money. They only gave them $3 billion. No private investor has ever indicated any interest in investing in this project in the 10 years that the project has been underway. Not one private investor. So the sole source of funding is the state, and that means taxpayers. And when the project was approved, even Democrats who opposed the project said, you know what's going to happen? $80 billion, $100 billion is going to wind up being paid by the taxpayers with no help from the federal government and no help from private investors. And you know why private investors are not interested? Because the project is a money loser, a total money loser. It will never make a profit. It'll have to be subsidized, which incidentally is forbidden by law. The law says the high-speed rail project in California cannot be subsidized. Its operating costs cannot be subsidized by the government. And there is no way that this railroad will ever earn a profit. Few railroads in the world earn a profit. There are about 2 of them. One in Japan, one in France, and that's about it. Certainly in the United States, railroads don't earn a profit.
How has polling changed since Proposition 1A was passed 10 years ago in 2008?
Well, the proposition did pass 51 to 49. The latest poll that I've seen indicate about 57 of the people in California are now disenchanted and don't like Proposition 1A and would like some changes to be made, the money to be redirected. So the public is out of favor with Proposition 1A. All of us who live in California know that we pay very high taxes. We're in desperate shape. Our infrastructure, our educational system, and so forth need improvement. And the money could well be spent on something like that.
How much time and money have you personally spent on opposing high-speed rail? What motivates you? And are you set up to take contributions?
There are two lawyers who are the principal lawyers in the litigation trying to have the high-speed rail project, the way it's being carried out, declared illegal and against the Constitution. I'm one of the lawyers. I am working free of charge and have been working free of charge for 10 years because I believe that this is a terrible boondoggle and that the people of California should be spared from it and that the money should be spent on higher priority projects. My colleague Stuart Flashman is a very esteemed lawyer, especially in the environmental and public works area. He is the other lawyer working on the project. He is paid, and most of the contributions that we raise are used to pay his legal fees and costs for the litigation that we have had on file since the year 2011. And yes, we are set up to take contributions, and the contributions are largely tax deductible.